Hey heroes, welcome to the On Scene First Nina ENP study group for the fall 22 exam. This is week 2. We're going to be talking about network design and architecture. And before we get started, I just want to start off by saying I apologize that I wasn't able to be on the live presentation on July 8th. I had some travel kerfuffle that prevented me from going live. So as promised, here is the recording. I will be on camera when we start the actual presentation. I recorded this section and forgot to hit record because that's how my week has been going. So just this first little section, I will be audio only, but I do just have to go over a few things for folks that may be joining us on the YouTube channel and you are not currently signed up for the fall 2022 study group. So if you are finding this video because you're wanting to take the test in the fall of 2022 and you're not yet a part of the study group, please join us at onscene1st.com/training/study ENP. So if you are within the July 1st and September 30th date range, you can still join the study group. It doesn't matter when you join the study group, you will get access to the Google group and the calendar invite to get us through the live presentations to the end of September. If you are finding this outside of September 30th and you want access to the Google group because you plan on taking the exam, say the February 2023, and you would like to get access to all of the materials that I provided, just not the live calendar invite, you can email me at teldridge@onscenefirst.com. So if you're watching this after September 30th and you're taking the exam for the February 2023, just email me and I'll give you access to all of the recordings and the materials in a much more organized fashion. And if you are not planning on taking the exam in the fall or February, and you're looking to take the exam in the spring of 2023, you want to join our next live session. I do 2 live sessions a year, next one starting in January of 2023. So if you want to be notified when that registration becomes available, go to my website at onscenefirst.com, scroll down to the bottom and just throw your name and email in there and you will be notified via the newsletter when it goes out. So I'm going to first start by thanking my premier study group sponsor, Rapid SOS. As many of you know, I worked there for 4 years. I was blessed to be able to play a role in delivering device-based location and additional data to 911 and field responders to make sure that they have all of the information that they need to save lives. If you're not familiar with their free technology, please visit rapidsos.com and tell them Tracy sent you. I also want to say thank you to my podcast and media sponsor, NGA Next Generation Advanced. They are an end-to-end NG 911 solution that's making big waves and providing a lot of amazing services to 911 and public safety. So if you want more information on what they're doing, visit nga911.com and tell them Tracy sent you. I just want to talk a little bit about the 7 scholarships that we have available right now for the ENP exam in the fall of 2022. We currently have 7 today. I'm hoping to hear later today, if not tomorrow, if we should have a few more. But right now we have 7 ENP exam scholarships available to those that are in the PSAP. If you are in the PSAP or the ECC, and your agency does not pay for the exam, that's the caveat. Your boss is gonna have to sign off on saying that they do not have the funding for it, because there's a lot of folks out there that their agencies pay for it, but then there's even more that their agency does not pay for it and they would have to pay out of pocket. So this really is to allow folks who don't have the agency financial support to be able to take the exam. So if you're interested in the scholarship, go to onscenefirst.com/scholarship and make sure that you get that application in by August 5th. We will be drawing the winner on August 19th. to make sure that you have enough time to submit your application by the September 2nd, I think, deadline for your application for the fall test period. And we wouldn't be able to do these scholarships if it wasn't for these amazing folks who believe in leveling up our 911 professionals. So special thank you to Rapid SOS, NGA Next Generation Advanced, Prepared, Responder Services Consulting, and the 911 Training Institute. So truly appreciate their support. Let's go ahead and get started with this week's topic. So before we get started, I just want to let you know that in this week's batch of stuff that I'm going to send to you, there's going to be an acronym list that I've pulled from a whole bunch of different places and put it in a PDF. These are just some acronyms that you should know, not just for the exam, but in the 911 space in general. I'm all about educating, not just on, what you're doing for the test, but also for what you're doing in your 911 profession. So there are acronyms that are on the exam. So you should probably learn those acronyms. You'll see on the slides as I go through them that I will tell you what the acronym stands for. And then I'll put the acronym on most of them. Every once in a while, I forget to add the acronym, but nonetheless, you'll have the list that will be provided to you. So let's get started with network design and architecture. So the first topic is transport classifications. Basically, the transport system can be thought of as a connect the dots type of situation. Our calls don't just go from one place to the other. It's not like Mike TV in the Willy Wonka movie where it just goes up in the air and goes across the air and then down to the next place. A lot of times there are many different interconnections that have to take place. So it's about getting that call to get from point A to point B. And depending on what type of call it is, where it's coming from, where it's going, what type it is, there's going to be different types of transport classifications. So as far as the OSP and the TSP, now in your manual, it's going to refer to the TSP, but they're both very similar in the point that we're trying to make here as far as service providers go. So our service providers, the originating service provider, is a communications provider that allows its users or subscribers to originate 911 voice or non-voice messages from the public to public safety answering points. So from the public to the public safety answering points, including but not limiting wireline, wireless, and VoIP, voice over internet protocol services. Okay, so the originating service provider is the person who owns the network in which your service is on. And what we'll learn later is that it isn't always the originating service provider that is delivering our 911 calls. So I could be an AT&T FirstNet customer, but if I'm in West Virginia where US Cellular is really prominent, even though my originating service provider is AT&T, it might actually be another service provider that is going to transfer that call into the 911 center. So then there's the TSP, which is referred to in your study guide, telecommunications service provider. And that's a type of communication service provider that has traditionally provided telephone and similar services. This category includes incumbent local exchange carriers, competitive local exchange carriers, and mobile wireless communication companies. And we're going to break those down in just a few minutes as to each what a LEC is, a CLEC, and our mobile communications carriers. So I have to laugh. This recently, I went to the National NENA conference in Louisville, Kentucky, and I had at least 3 people come up to me and thank me for putting on the study group, but also recited my interpretation of understanding lattice and the type of LATAs there are. And I just thought it was hilarious. And I hope that you find value in my little synopsis and story. I did add a little bit from the last session. So if you took the last session, I'm going to add one more piece because somebody identified it as being a part of what we should know. So LATAs, local access and transport areas, are geographical areas in which numbers are routed. So where the call is going to get routed is going to be based on where the switch is. And I'm sure you've heard some of these terms, but we are going to talk about switches and switching and what it all is. But it's really hard to present in a way that it's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? So I'm starting here. I'm starting with the geographic locations, and we'll go from there. So typically, LATAs do not cross over into another state. So I'm going to show you a diagram of some switching that goes across the US, but nonetheless, LATAs do not always, they generally do not cross over state lines. But I'm going to give you an image, and hopefully this will break it down for you. But I'm also going to give you a little Tracy's ADHD tips to kind of remember what is what one. And I know there have been questions on LATAs on the exam, so I hope this helps. So generally there are two types of LATAs, but I am going to give you a third type. It's a much smaller type, but generally there are two types: the intra with the RA, and then inter. There are actually two types of intra RA, and we're going to break down all three of those in just a second. So the first one is what they call an intra-office call. Now, I want you to think of LATAs as being a company. It's just a company. Okay, so the Acme 911 company. All right, and we're going to use people as an example. So when I refer to intra, it's going to mean within my office or within my team. Okay, so intra are the people that we love and we celebrate them. Rah, rah, they're in our clique. They're in our group. So whenever I refer to intra, think of rah, rah. We're happy to have them in our group. I know it's silly, but it works. I heard 3 times that it works. So whenever we say intra, they are inside our group. They're not outside. We'll talk about the outside folks in a minute that are not in our cool kids club. Okay. So intra office is if the call is, if the calling party and the called party are in the same switching system, means they're really, really close. Like they're almost sitting at the desk next to you. So I want you to think of that as maybe a town. So if the call, if I'm in Rochester, Mass, and I am calling Rochester, I'm calling my neighbor, then it's going to be technically an intra-office call because it's wicked close. Okay. So that's the first intra, rah, rah. They're inside our switching network. And then there is intra-LATA. And now you can see by the diagram there that the call, the telecommunication service that starts in one part of the LATA, but it ends in another part of that same LATA, local access transport area. Okay, so this is more, the way I look at this one is, again, intra, rah, they're within our geographic service area for that switching. It's not going outside yet. So I would think of that as more of the county. We still belong It still belongs to each other. So if you take a town like Rochester, that is the intra office. Rah, rah. They're in our clique. They're in our group. They're our friends. And then you have a little bit of a wider gap, but you're in the same place. So intra, they're still in our group. So rah, rah, they're still in our county because my town belongs in my county. We belong together. So it's still rah, rah. And it's happening within our boundaries. So it starts in our ladder and it ends inside of our ladder. We're not going outside of it yet. Because when we go outside, then they're not really in our group. They're not really our people. They're not our friends yet. Okay. So when you think about it, I want you to think of a group, a team. You're in the team, rah, rah. It's silly, but you'll remember it this way. And then there's interlata. Those folks are on the outside of our little group. They're on the outside of our town. They're on the outside of our county. So basically, an inter refers to the people that are not on our team. We're like, we don't like them. Outside of our group. As silly as it is, it works. So as you can see by the diagram here, it starts in one ladder and it ends in another ladder. So I'll continue on with using the town, the county, and then the actual state. So in office, rah, rah, there are people. We're in a very close proximity, like we're sitting next to each other in an office per se, right? The intra-lata branches out into the county. So it's still starting in our boundary and it's ending in our boundary. So rah, rah, it's in our little group. Now, inter, they're outside. We don't like them very much. They're outside of our little clique. And now that's going to be the rest of the state. Now, while this isn't actually technical terms, I'm using these things as a visual to help you understand the difference between intra office call, intra-lata, and inter-lata. So intra, they're in our boundaries. That means either close proximity, like a town. Intra-lata, still in our boundaries, but maybe a little further out, like maybe the next town over, maybe 2 towns over, but it's still in our county. It's still in our boundaries. And then anybody outside of that boundary that has nothing to do with us, it's outside, inter-lata. So I have one more visual for you, and this is it. So you can take this for what it's worth to use the example that I gave you. Now, this isn't how it technically is. There's no set, if it's a town, it's a ladder, that's not what it is. I'm using this as a visual to really just drive the point home between these 3 things. So I used the analogy of the town in the county and the rest of the state, other counties, but it's still inside the state. So it's not going to bounce out of Massachusetts. This is what I'm using here as an example. It's not going to bounce out of Massachusetts. So what you see that we have here is the first one is going to be that intra-office call. That's going to be Rochester. That's going to be the town. Okay. It's much smaller, much closer together. There's probably going to be one central office that accommodates this switching area. The second one is going to be intra-lata, rah-rah. They're in our group, which is now this yellow color. Okay, the yellow color, which is the county. This is Plymouth County, Massachusetts. So Rochester is inside of Plymouth County. So we're still all on the same team, rah-rah. And then there is going to be the interlata. That's that orangey color that sits outside of our group. So the folks in Bristol County and Bounceville County and Norfolk County, they don't have anything to do with our boundary. So if they're in our boundary, rah-rah. We like that. If they're out of our boundary, we don't like that. So for whatever it's worth, there you go. I hope it helps. The inter-exchange, the IEC or the IXC, depending on, which way they want to use it, can be used interchangeably. It provides service to the public between local exchanges or inter-LATA basis in compliance with local and federal regulatory requirements. So if you take what I just said about inter and intra, this inter exchange, it's going to allow me in this LATA to talk to the person in the other LATA, the one that's outside our group. Remember, inter. So just think of it as a place, a building that sits between, two places, two LATAs. One is mine, intra, rah, and one is not mine, inter. It's not mine. And it's going to house the place where the connections are going to be made to be able to connect those two LATAs. That's what the inter exchange is. Okay. And it's also referred to as a long distance carrier. So if you go back to my diagram of the county and the state and all that, way back in the day, do you remember when you didn't call people until after 7 o'clock at night because there were no long distance charges for whatever reason? I could live in the state of Massachusetts and I'm living in Rochester, the little red square, and maybe my aunt that lives in Boston, which is outside of my county. That was a long distance call. So somebody had to connect my local carrier with the long distance carrier. So if you remember way back in the day, you would have, maybe I had Verizon for my phone system, but I had Ma Bell for my long distance carrier. This inter-exchange place is where your local carrier and your long distance carrier switch off, and then the long distance carrier will send that call on to where it needs to go. So there you go. So a little bit more about exchange carriers. So exchange carriers, first is your local exchange carrier, refers to the service area provided by a central office. And we're going to talk about central office in a second, but just visualize central office as being a building at this moment. It's going to be a building and somebody owns those lines inside the building. And we'll talk about them in just 2 more bullets. But the local exchange refers to the service area provided by that central office, the central office being the building. So in my town in Rochester, we have a central office that's up on North Avenue. That central office accommodates Rochester. It may branch off into Freetown a little bit, but for the most part, that local exchange refers to the service area. So Rochester is the service area that belongs to that central office that is located on North Avenue. The exchange area refers to the geographic area in which the charges and services are uniform. So the exchange area is where does that central office also accommodate? So that could be a little bit outside the line in Freetown and maybe Lakeville. And then the local exchange carrier is a telecommunications carrier under the State and Local Utilities Act that provides local exchange telecommunication services to a service area. So in Rochester, we have a couple of folks that accommodate it. We have Verizon and we have Comcast. So those would be our local exchange carriers, but then you have other types that are on there. We're going to talk about those in a little bit, like Voip and all that. But when you take a 911 call, and you look on your Annie and Allie screen, whoever your service provider is who is sending you that call. Who is the one that's sending you that call? So many 911 phone systems, they identify it as a LEC, L-E-C, local exchange carrier. So you might see Verizon there. You might see AT&T. You might see T-Mobile. You might be seeing Sprint, PCS. If it's not listed as a LEC, it might be listed as a telco. It might be listed as a company ID. but the LEC provides the phone system infrastructure. How is the call getting into your 911 center? A local exchange carrier is sending it to you. Now, it may not be your carrier, like as the example I gave, AT&T. I have AT&T FirstNet, but if I'm in West Virginia and they are prominent US cellular towers everywhere, then my 911 call might be riding in on a US cellular tower. And then that's going to create its own sense of issues. We're going to talk about that in another session. Then there is something called a competitive local exchange carrier, a CLEC. CLEC is a competitor to the LEC. Basically, it's like a level up. It takes it up a notch because the LEC is only going to be able to send very minimal data. A lot of times it's just voice. But the CLEC, such as an example of a CLEC, is bandwidth. Maybe you've heard of bandwidth. I'm just using them as an example. Bandwidth can be more innovative because the infrastructure is in place already. And now I'm going to go back to my days at Rapid SOS, and I just want to give you an example of how it happens. Your enhanced 911, your 911 call comes in, it's a wireless phase 2. Maybe you get relatively accurate location information, which is great. But on your alley screen, there's only going to be so much data that is displayed. And it's very consistent, right? You're going to see the LEC or the telco or the company ID. You're going to see the class of service. You're going to see latitude and longitude. You're going to see the date, the time. And there's minimal information that you're going to see. But then there's a time where there might be more information available, but your LEC doesn't have the ability to send that data through to you on your alley screen. And this is what happened with Rapid SOS. So when Rapid SOS first started, there was an app called Haven. Many of you know how I felt about the Haven app. It is no longer here, but nonetheless, this is what Bandwidth was able to provide Rapid SOS. If you recall the app that they use, Haven, you were able to identify if there was, if it was a crash, if it was a medical call, if it was a police or a fire call. So you had 4 tiles that you could push the button. If you looked at an example of a call that was placed with the Haven app, you might have seen that the LEC or the telco or company ID, whatever it's called on your system, said BAND, meaning bandwidth. But when you looked at the alley screen, there were a couple of pieces of information that you were able to see. You could see what number they pressed. They pressed the police shield. It would tell you that it was a police-related incident. If you press the cross, it would tell you that it was an EMS-related incident. And if you had your accurate name and information in there, it would also display that too. So understanding that a CLEC, competitive LEC, they do this and they level it up a little bit. They allow you to get additional data into the Annie and Alley screen. Now, the Annie and Alley screen only holds so much data, so you can't put a ton in there. But that CLEC, competitive LEC, it's going to one-up them. It's going to allow them to have additional information. So if you see a question on that, that's the easiest way that I could explain it. Then there's something called the Public Switched Telephone Network, PSTN. You may have heard this before, but had no idea what it was. Now, it's been around for a long time, the Public Switched Telephone Network. You know, there used to be a time where you had a phone, but you could only call somebody in your town because you had the switchboard operators, right? It was like it would take your call and then put it over here and connect it with somebody else. But as the Public Switched Telephone Network, the PSTN, starts getting built out using the North American Dialing Plan, NADP, it is considerable. You can think of it as a internet for the phone system, right? So you had this internet thing, and it can go from one side of the country to the other. So think about when that all first started, right? You're in chat rooms and you're talking to people across the country. Long before that was the capability to move a phone call. So if I'm in California and I need to call Aunt Sophia in Massachusetts, I can make that call, but it's not just going to go from California to Massachusetts. It's going to go to Northern California, and then it's going to come down here, and then it's going to jump into Texas, and then, wherever the rest of those things are. But it's going to move across the country. It happens relatively quickly, but that is what the public switch telephone network looks like, according to me. So now we have a central office. There are going to be two terms that might be a little bit confusing, but I want to give you a way to figure out which one's which. So first we're going to do the central office, then we'll do end office in just a minute. The central office usually refers to a local switching system that connects lines from the subscriber and trunks to other switches. So that central office on North Avenue in my town, that's the facility that houses the switching mechanisms that's going to allow me to make a phone call in Rochester, Massachusetts. It's going to allow me to call somebody outside of my area. It is also the building that houses the place where the lines are connected to the TSPs, the telecommunication service providers, switching equipment for the purposes of connecting to other subscribers. So it's not just the lines that are moving from one place to the other. It is the building, the central office. It's also the building that is accommodating that. So I've said the word switching a few times. So it's important to understand what switching is. When you hear the word the switch, or when it gets to the switch, a lot of folks don't necessarily understand how the switching mechanism works. So legacy telephone switching is the process of connecting the calling party to the called party without the use of transport facilities. You're not running a wire from me calling you. It's going through one network, then it will pick the next network and it'll switch the mechanism, and now it will bring it up to the next level, and then it moves it, and then it brings it to the next one, and then so on and so forth. So you have all these little things that are turning, and it's moving that call from one place to another. I found this video on YouTube, AT&T Archives, the step-by-step switch. I highly recommend you search it and just watch it, because while I'm giving you a very low-level explanation, they can give you a higher level. It's an 8-minute video, and it helped me understand how switching worked for the purposes of what we're doing here. Okay. So it is important to understand what the switching is. And then I just think of the TikTok sound, like, how did this turn into this? So how did we go from traditional, when we had our operators who would take the call and they would hear the person on the other side, and they would take their call and they would move it over. So say I had to call the local drugstore because I needed some medicine. I would pick up my phone, and Mildred would be there, and I'd be like, "Hi, Mildred, this is Tracy, and I need to get to Old Man Jenkins Pharmacy. Can you connect me?" So then she would take my line and she would just pop it into Old Man Jenkins Pharmacy. Well, what happened is we had to move from this type of system. And I just think the story is very interesting. And I'm all about stories, right? Because if I tell you a silly story, you might actually remember how this turned into this. So when we used to be back in the old days, and then we moved to these switching containers. So when you go into a central office, you're going to see little containers like these, which are switching calls automatically. But it was this guy that invented it. It's this guy who made this switching and this automatic switching possible. He was an undertaker. He had a funeral home. He was losing business because his competitor's wife worked as an operator in the manual switching facility. So whenever somebody would call and say, we need the funeral home, that wife was sending all the calls to her house or her husband. So this guy, Alman Brown Strauger, he created the first switching system to automatically switch the calls. And now it's what we know as our switching units today. Just a silly side note. I just thought it's a cute little story. The end office. So you might see call. There's going to be a couple of different things that are going to be happening here. So stick with me. I'm doing a brief overview of it right now, but then I'm going to do a more detailed overview with it in another section, because we're going to talk about isolation of the end office. We're going to talk about loss of the central office. There's going to be different terminologies. So we're just going to go over it now, but then we're going to go over it again in just a little bit. Well, not today, but another day. So when we refer to the central office, it's when the lines go from the subscriber's information through the network into the central office, which is now the facility. We're going to talk about the facility piece of it. And then, hold on one second. All right, so the end office, which is also called the class 5 office, and silly as it is, here is my little ADHD tip, or however you want to, whatever you want to call it, to kind of remember it is, for me, it was in 5th grade. I ended my time at Wampatuck Elementary School, and I moved on to another school. So whatever it is that you have to think about. So I ended my time in 5th grade, 5. I ended my time at Wampatuck Elementary, and I moved on to another school. So that's it. That's the big way for me to remember it. But then I'm going to take the ending piece of it just a little bit further. Is the end office. If you see the word terminate, or I'll get to it in a second, but the end office, it's programmed to point all 911 calls to a single destination in that particular calling area. It assures the call will be answered, but it only goes to one PSAP. Okay. And then, since the area served by the end office does not always line up with the jurisdictional boundaries, the call may not be routed to the proper agency. So that's, you just got to kind of keep that in mind, is that sometimes the geographic area that is involved in this particular end office, it might not match up with your geographic area. So I just gave you a little a visual here. So the blue is the jurisdictional boundaries, and then the black is the end office jurisdiction. So they may overlap each other. So that's why you might have some calls that get misrouted. And it's important to understand when that happens. If the call wasn't supposed to go to where it went, then you need to fill out a discrepancy report. And this is the first time that this group will hear me say the word discrepancy report or discrepancy form. But it is important that if the call is coming to your PSAP and it shouldn't be, or if you're getting a call from somebody else and you shouldn't have, you need to fill out a discrepancy report. And again, if you're watching this during the study group, until Monday, if you see this video before Monday, go to my website at onscenefirst.com, go up to training, and go to the webinars tab. I'm going to be doing a webinar on July 18th, 2020 with Mark Fletcher and Hank Hunt, where we are going to talk about the importance of discrepancy reports and when we should be filling them out. We have a section in this class on it, but if you want to register for that webinar now, if you're outside of that time frame, you can still go to my website and you can find access to the recorded version of it. So it doesn't really matter when you're registering for it, but if you want to watch it live, you need to register before July 18th. The webinar is at 10 a.m. Eastern. So a little bit more information about the end office. It is a switching system within a local access and transport area or market, whichever they want to refer to it as, where a customer's lines are terminated for the purpose of interconnection to each other or other trunk. So again, that place in the central office, if I'm in Rochester and I place a call to Aunt Sophia in Boston, my call is going to go to the central office, but it's also going to be considered an end office because the call is going to terminate there. It's going to stop and it's going to use the inter-exchange and it's going to switch. And now it's going to go on to the long distance carrier, which is going to carry it on outside of my LADA. Does that make sense? All right. It is basically the central office that connects the customer's equipment and offers dial tone. These days, the central office and the end office can be one and the same. So it is a little bit confusing, but as you see a question, if you see a question, what is it determining? Has it ended in that location? If it says where it terminates, it's the end office or the class 5 office. Because the class 5, that's where my time at Wampatuck terminated. That helps one person. I'll be happy. Then there's the access tandem. The access tandem. So I remember before I started working at Rapid SOS, I had no idea what a tandem was. I just knew that it was a word that I saw. Where did I see it? I would see it when a 911 call would come in and it would say something along the lines of, denied access, disconnect between tandem and something or else. And I had no idea what it was, but now we're going to learn about what an access tandem is. So it's a switch system that provides traffic concentration. Oh, sorry. Just trying to move it over a little bit. A switch system that provides traffic concentration and distributes calls between the end office and the inter-exchange carrier. Okay, so there's a tandem, there's a switch, and it distributes the call between the end office, meaning that place that the call terminates, and the inter-exchange carrier, where it now picks it up. So it's a switch, and that's where it moves it from one type of phone system to that long distance carrier. So the local exchange to the long distance. Okay, so envision I'm calling Aunt Sophia McGillicuddy in Boston. I'm in Rochester, pick up the phone, dial her phone number. That call is going to travel to the central office. It's going to terminate there. It's going to hit this access tandem, which is part of the switch, and it's going to send that call in, and it's going to switch it. Now it's going to send it on to another network, and it's that inter-exchange carrier that's going to allow that to happen. So it connects the LEC, the local exchange carrier, to the long distance carrier. Okay, so it provides the inter-exchange carrier access to all end offices within the LADA. All right, so I hope that makes sense.
How to access the Emergency Response Data Platform. Any public safety agency can access life-saving emergency data through the Rapid SOS Emergency Response Data Platform. There are two ways of doing so. Rapid SOS Portal is a powerful web-based tool that enables you to manage emergencies and access location and supplemental data for every call in your jurisdiction. Signing up for Rapid SOS Portal is easy and only takes a few minutes. In addition to emergency management tools and data, Rapid SOS Portal includes a training platform as well as administrative tools to manage user permissions, track usage, and analyze trends in your agency. To learn more and sign up for Rapid SOS Portal, please visit rapidsosportal.com. Rapid SOS also integrates with every major CAD, CPE, mapping, or other public safety softwares. With an integration, you can receive Rapid SOS data through your existing workflow. and you won't need any additional screens, tabs, or windows. To learn more about integrations, visit rapidsos.com/public-safety-partners.
Facility or facilities. So when we think about facilities, we often think of buildings, right? So that's what we should be doing here as well. So the facility or facilities, when we're referring to that, we're referring to the physical building that houses the phone system mechanisms, such as switching systems, cables, microwave buildings, etc. It's not to be confused with transport facilities. If we say transport facilities, it is not buildings. This is the actual mechanism for transport of the phone service, such as trunks, copper wire, microwave, satellite, all that stuff. So you have your facility and facilities, that's a building, a physical place, a building that's housing all of this stuff. And then you have your transport facilities, meaning the mechanism and the means in which data is transferred. So when you see the word facility or facilities, make sure you're reading it in context and that it doesn't confuse you, okay? Because it is used in two different places and has two different meanings. So there's something called the local loop. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's the wires that run from the subscriber's telephone back to the serving central office. So the local loop is me in Rochester at my house, picking up my phone, calling out Sophia, and then that call, it's going to go through the wires and it's going to go to the central station on North Avenue to figure out where it is that it needs to go next. Okay. And it does that as long as there is no network interface device that is involved in this. So I'm going to tell you what that device is in just a second. So if you look outside of your house, there is a demarcation point. And that equipment is from the phone company. So when you put dial tone at your house, when you get a new phone system, when you're building a new house or you're changing providers or whatever, on the outside of the house, there's going to be a box somewhere. And that box is called a network interface device. So it takes its equipment from the phone company that terminates its lines at the customer premise. So there's a shift inside that box. It signifies that demarcation point. So anything that goes wrong outside the demarcation point is the responsibility of the telephone company. And even though they've put the phone service and the system and everything in your house originally, once it's installed, the inside of the house is now your responsibility. So when we say, going back to the previous slide, that local loop, it goes from the subscriber's lines to the end office. That is if there is no demarcation in place through one of these items. Now, most houses have these, most buildings have these. And you'll know is if you call the phone company and there's a problem and they'll say something along the lines of, well, we'll check the lines outside, but if it's inside your house, you're going to have to pay for it. Because it's a demarcation between what they own and what you are currently responsible for. We're going to talk a little bit about area codes. So just a cute little visual up here. In 1947, there were 86 original area codes for making phone calls. Now, if you think about it, back in 1947, there weren't as many phones as there are out there today, obviously, right? But what we need you to know about is what an area code split is versus an area code overlay. Okay, because they're two different things. So an area code split, and I put Massachusetts there for a reason. One, I live here. I'm familiar with the area codes and how our system works here. When I was growing up, we did not have this many area codes. I think we had a handful of them. I think there were maybe four or five of them. But if you notice over time, we've had to add more area codes. An area code split designates a single area code for a particular geographic region. It's to create more phone numbers. So if you think about it, so if Massachusetts is broken up into, say, 256 communities, you're not going to have 256 area codes. So maybe originally, I don't even know, I'm just making this up, but I just want to kind of give you this perspective. So maybe everybody in Plymouth County had a 508 area code, and everybody in Barnstable County had a 617 area code. And I know that's not what it is, so Massachusetts folks don't come at me. But they had to select a geographical area that says any phone number that lives in this area is going to be a 508 or a 413 or a 617 area code. But then what they realized is that they were running out of numbers. They were running out of numbers, and they had to create more numbers. So they had to create more area codes to create more numbers. Okay, so an area code split means they're splitting, just like splitting an atom, right? You have an atom. So say the 508 area code is in 5 counties. So if they're going to split the atom, if they're going to split the area code, they're going to separate parts out, and they're going to assign new area codes. So you may have the same exchange, but now you have a different area code. Does that make sense? And then you have what's called an area code overlay. The overlay designates more than one area code for a particular geographic reason. It's used when the split no longer allows for additional numbers. So you're not going to keep splitting and getting it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, meaning adding more and more and more and more area codes. What they're going to do is they're going to overlay another area code on top of the current area code. So I'm using Rochester, Massachusetts as an example. So Rochester, Mass, basically forever, and what I knew until the 774 area code came to be, we were a 508 area code. But then before you knew it, there were people in Rochester that would have a 774 area code. So what it did is it allowed for more numbers, right? But it didn't make Rochester split and have a brand new area code, which would happen in a split. It had an overlay. So it meant that Rochester now has 2 area codes that belong to it. And now that 774 is also an area code for wireless devices, and it's also an area code for some of our other jurisdictions. So it's not just used for Rochester. So just keep in mind that the split makes it that there's more numbers in more geographical locations, like splitting of an atom. We're going to take this piece off and move it over here, and this piece off and move it over here, and this piece off and move it over here. The overlay is going to go right on top of it, which means there's more numbers that could be in that geographic area, but it's going to be served by more than one area code. So the split, one area code. The overlay, more than one area code for that jurisdiction. And then N11 or NXX is an opportunity to access other types of services with just three digits. And so many of them that you see here, you're probably aware of them, but they are assigned by the North American Numbering Plan, which is what we talked about before. And it's basically a number with 11 added to it. Okay. So when we dial 211, it could be identified as a community service and information. 311 is municipal government services. 411 directory assistance. 511 traffic assistance. 611 phone company repair. So when you use your wireless device and you dial 611, you get your phone provider's service center, right? So if there's a problem, you contact them through 611. 711, TDD and relay for the deaf. 811, underground public utility location. And 911 is emergency services. Okay, so the N11 is brought on by the North American numbering plan, and it just basically allows you to get to other services with just a few short presses of buttons. We're going to talk about VoIP. VoIP over voice over internet protocol. So this was supposed to be animated, but I forgot to make it animated, and that's okay because we're not even on. Last year I had it up there and I had it animated, but my computer crashed. I had to make new presentations and I forgot to make it animated. But last year I asked folks in the group, and if I was live right now, I would have asked, does anyone know when VoIP was first introduced? I started as a baby dispatcher in 1996, and I didn't realize that in 1995, VoIP was already starting to, bless us with its presence. It wasn't until 99 and 2000-ish when we really started seeing VoIP providers providing service and it interfering with our 911 systems in different ways. So we'll talk about that. But VoIP, I don't know why I keep saying VoIP, voice over internet protocol. It's an internet protocol term for a set of capabilities used to manage and deliver the voice over the internet. And it's a cheap phone service. It was much cheaper for folks to get this internet-based phone system because there was less involved in it. It was just simply over an internet connection. But what a lot of folks didn't realize is it came with a lot of challenges. One of the biggest challenges was you couldn't call 911. Or they didn't know that they couldn't call 911. So basically what would happen was they had to activate the 911 service, or they had to pay extra to access 911. And before long, that got changed. There were several 911 situations where folks would try to call 911 and the call would not go through. Then there were other situations where folks would have this internet phone system where they would have to generate their address associated with the phone. They were able to then take that soft phone and then move to Florida for 6 months from Massachusetts because it's wicked cold here. And they would go down to Florida. They would just snowbird and they'd fly down to Florida and they would stay there, but they never go on and change their address. So they're in Florida and say the house across the street from them ends up on fire. They pick up the phone to call 911 because of the phone and the address that's associated with it. That call will come back to Rochester and I would answer the call, but not realize that they have taken that voice over internet phone and brought it down south with them. So it started to create havoc. It was creating havoc on our 911 system. It was happening more than we cared to admit. I remember some lady coming in asking what I thought about it as a 911 official. And she said, my mother-in-law's on a budget and we were looking into it for her. We wanted to know, do you think it's a good idea? And I said, well, it depends on how much you like your mother-in-law, because if she has to call 911, you might run into some problems. So with that, just be careful. There's something called voice over VoIP providers, service providers, VSPs. They are the company that offers VoIP, telecommunication services that may be used to generate a 911 call. And it interconnects with the 911 network. So your VoIP service providers, some of them we'll show in just a minute. But I remember when they was first starting to come out, like we were getting nervous. So just a little bit about VoIP that the study guide wants you to know. So there are times where it's called voice over interconnected protocol. We're talking about voice over internet protocol. There are times that it's called interconnected. It's not wrong. It's just a different mechanism, a different means. But just know that if somebody says interconnected protocol, it's not necessarily wrong. Okay, so first bullet point, it's a telephony term for a set of capabilities used to manage the delivery of voice communications over the internet, as we said. The voice communications are sent in digital form. Okay, so voice is digital form. Call servers, computers are what gets the call to where it needs to go. It's not using the traditional switching that we talked about in the central office or the end office. And there are times, so this last bullet here, what that pertains to is a phone number is not a must for a VoIP phone. Now, I know that sounds a little bit interesting or confusing, but if there's a case where you use something like Skype or WhatsApp, some type of app-based program, well, maybe not WhatsApp because you have a phone there, but we're going to talk more about that on our webinar coming up. So definitely check that out on the website under webinars. Okay. And I think it's titled, Where Are They Calling From? That's not right. Now what? Something like that. But if they do attempt to use the phone service through Skype, because it's technically a soft phone type situation, they have to have a URI, which is a uniform resource identifier. And then that behind the scenes, there's all kinds of other mechanisms that have to be in place to accommodate that. So we'll talk more about that later. Some of your VoIP service providers, as we mentioned, it's a company that offers VoIP telecommunication services that may be used to generate that 911 call. So these are some of the first one was actually Vocaltech. I thought the first one was Vonage, but I was mistaken. Then we have Vonage and then Nextiva, and there's so many others. But these are VoIP, true VoIP phone providers. Then you have internet-based phone systems, such as like your local cable, where they're using DSL, which is an internet type phone system, but it's not exactly the same as the voice over internet protocol. So not a whole lot of detail in the study guide about that stuff, but I just wanted to share that sometimes there's two different types of internet-based phone systems. So there are FCC rules as far as VoIP phone systems go. In the beginning, there was not. And what I'd like to share there too is in the beginning, there was not rules about VoIP phones, just like there are not many app rules right now that are in place to accommodate the apps that are being generated to call 911. So we'll talk more about that at another time too. So this is what your call flow looks like for a voice over internet protocol. So VoIP equipment, whether it's the phone using like Wi-Fi dialing or some type of booster or something in the home, goes to the call server, has to go to a signaling or a media gateway. And we're going to talk more about gateways. So again, once you get the gateway information, you can come back here and have a better understanding of what the gateway is. The gateway is usually a place where there's some type of exchange or some type of change in the way that the phone call is being maneuvered through the system. So you need gateways to take an NG system and integrate it, or a legacy system and integrate it into an NG system, and vice versa. Once it goes through the signaling media gateway, it'll go to that inter-exchange. And again, it's not going through the central office. It's not going through an end office, but it still has to have this exchange take place. Goes through the 911 tandem. Then it gets to a central office. Okay, so in the beginning, it's not going like, so if I place a call from my house, it's going right from my house to the central office. You have a few other steps in place before you get there. And then it goes from the central office to the PSAP. So this is listed in your study guide, just some information, more acronyms. So a commercial mobile radio service, CMRS, is also known as a wireless service provider. Okay. The FCC term for carrier or licensee whose wireless network is connected to the public switch telephone network. Okay, so those service providers, whether it's a wireless device or if it's a regular phone line or VoIP over internet protocol, this is CMRS is used for that. That's the term that's used for that. A little bit more information about the commercial mobile radio services. The wireless network is distributed over land area called cells. So we say cell phone, it's not like where did it come from? There's these cells, okay, across the area that kind of talk from one to the other. So each are, sorry, typo there. Each is served by at least one fixed location transceiver known as a cell site or base station. The base station provides the cell with the network coverage that can be used for the transmission of voice and data. So the cell towers, right? Those are the base stations. So where do they cover? How far do they cover? How many cells are they covering? Then there's something called Cdma, which is kind of under that umbrella of what we just talked about. So code division multiple access. Some of this stuff is really hard to understand. Some of it is not even relevant to what we're dealing with right now and today. Some of it you never ever have to know, but you do need to know it for this exam. So the Cdma type phone systems are a spread spectrum multiple access technique. So they are part of this type of technique. And what that technique is it basically spreads the data across, or spreads the bandwidth of data across the network evenly, power distributed appropriately. So it takes that data and it spreads it across that network. And it's a little bit more detailed than that, but that's as far as I'm going because it is not going that deep in the study guide. So I'm not going to go too far deep there. Then there are two other umbrellas that fall under the CMRS: Global Systems for Mobile Communications, GSM phones, and then UMTS, Universal Mobile Telephone Telecommunication Systems. So you have GSM is 2G. Okay, that's what we kind of started out a while ago, a long time ago. Very rarely do you see these types of phones anymore. And then there's 3G. Okay. These are still widely used in Europe and some other countries, but here we're moving forward. We're getting faster and we're getting broader and we're getting wider with what we can deliver to 911. And what we're using these days is LTE, long-term evolution. So LTE is now moving into the 4G wireless standard that provides increased network capacity and speed for cell phones and other cellular devices compared with the 3G technology. Okay. LTE offers higher peak data transfer rates, up to 100 Mbps downstream and 30 Mbps upstream. I don't even understand what a half of that is, but I know that when I look at my cable, DSL, and like my internet and all that, it's how fast the data comes in and how fast the data goes out. And as we move towards LTE, 4G, and then 5G, we're just getting much faster and much more room to be able to get that data to move forward. All the wireless service providers will be migrating to LTE and IP multimedia subsystems. And then the next step, it is our next step. The LTE is the next step in the wireless network capabilities. So I want to talk about a couple of different cells, some cells that you guys may be dealing with in your 911 centers for various reasons. But a macro cell, big cell, big, macro, big, right? Those are the ones that you see up on the tower, as you can see here. A cell used in cellular networks with the function of providing radio coverage to a large area. I just put an R in there, another R that it doesn't belong there, but I'm from Massachusetts, what we do. So it's providing radio coverage to a large area of a mobile network access area. So cells that are up on the wire, up on the towers. Then there's something called small cells or fixed mobile devices. Small cells are low-powered radio access nodes that operate in a licensed and unlicensed spectrum, right? So these are smaller cells. And then we're going to get even smaller. Okay. We're going to talk about femtocells. This is a subset of the small cell, and it's also called a microcell. So you have the macro cell, the really big ones, wicked big ones, and then you have the smaller cells, okay, which are called small cells, and then you have femtocells or microcells that are even that small, much smaller, and you can see them here. These smaller ones are usually used in businesses and houses when their cell coverage inside the facility sucks. So what it does is it connects the service provider network to the broadband network. So these femtocells, so if I have AT&T wireless and I'm sitting in my home and I'm not near a tower, my cell coverage is not great where I am, I can get one of these femtocells and I can plug it in, and then I can allow my phone to connect to it. And what it does is he turns that call into a Voip call. It's now going over the internet, and it can pose challenges for 911. I've seen some situations. So this is these are two screenshots of calls that came in, and it was indicated that they were well, there were a couple of things that indicated that they were actual femtocells or microcells. The first one on the left, you see there's a 911 area code there, which we'll talk about later in another place. But what this was a disconnected cell phone that these two knuckleheads that were playing with the phone decided to use a disconnected cell phone to dial 112, because if you dial 112 here in the US, the call will ultimately be transferred to 911, because 112 is one of the other 911 type numbers, emergency services in other countries. So these two knuckleheads decided to take a disconnected cell phone, dial 211, and it came through to my 911 center as a wireless phase 2 call, when in reality it was not a wireless phase 2 call, but it was identifying that because it had gone through a fixed AT&T MO, which was a microcell. And the only reason why we knew this is because I know that the address that's listed there on the alley, based on wireless phase 2 capabilities, that address should be a tower address. It was not. It was the residence. So since there's no tower, we're like, how is this happening? So I had a conversation with the family and realized that they had one of these microcells, femtocells in their home, because their phone provider was not good in that area. And then the other one on the right there, I don't know all of the details. Excuse me. I don't know all of the details regarding the call on the right, but I did want to point out to you that it actually says Femtocell right on it. So could it have been a CLEC, a competitive local exchange carrier, that allowed it to send that additional information through? But nonetheless, just keep an eye out for these femtocells, microcells that are sending this information through. So the next section we're going to talk about is those transport facilities, not a facility as in a building, but a facility as a mechanism in how to send information through the networks. So transport facilities is the physical medium over which the transmission takes place. It is a way for either an analog or digital message to get from point A to point B. And we have a few different types of these mechanisms. So first, you have copper wire. The copper wire is there's still a lot of places where copper wire is in fact being used in the 911 system. We're transferring and migrating away from it because we're becoming more internet-based. But nonetheless, copper wires out there still exist. They are the original infrastructure of the telephone system, and they are often referred to as twisted pairs, as they're usually a pair, not par, sorry about that typo, a pair of wires that are twisted together, as you can see here, okay? Then there's fiber optic. As soon as I think of fiber optic, I think of those little things at the circus or the 700 Christmas decorations my mom has in her house with the little filament with the light on the end of it. So that's the difference. You're going to think about that when you think of fiber optic. It is technology in which the light is transmitted through thin filaments of glass. Okay, so visualize that fiber optics. When you have that little wand thingy, it looks like pieces of glass, right? And then the light is coming through there. Thousands of simultaneous voice signals can be transmitted over long distances. So this makes sense, right? It's relatively low cost and it requires less space. Look at how tiny those little things are. And they are not sensitive to interference. And if you want to remember, they're not sensitive to interference, just vision a 5-year-old with one of those little light things in their hand doing this, and it still works. So that's, if you need to remember fiber optic, and if it says, which one of these is not sensitive to interference, remember the 5-year-old that's shaking the toy at the circus. All right. So microwave or shortwave is a wavelength of radio signal that travels in a straight line for a short distance. Okay. It's not going to go far. And so in this case, you might need repeaters and things, to get you from one place to the other. It uses electromagnetic waves in radio frequencies to transmit phone, video, and data. And they travel using line of sight to approximately 30 miles. So it's not far. You definitely need to have some repeaters in place to allow that information to go from one place to the other. Then we have coaxial cable. You usually see this in cable television, situations, as you can see in that third bullet. But it's a cable that's been created to be able to shield outside interference. So coaxial cable also is pretty protective when it comes to interference. But I think with the fiber optic, you may not see the interference question. You might more see the question that's regarding the light, right? The pieces of glass and light. But coaxial cable is also pretty heavy duty and protective. It has the capability of transmitting large amounts of data at a high rate of speed. Okay, so when you see it, that we used to use these for cable television, that's a lot of stuff that's going through one of these lines. And then satellite. Your satellite mechanisms, and when we move things, so it's a specialized form of microwave transmission where the tower from tower is actually in the sky. So satellite has the ability to send microwave type data from one place to another with the tower being in the sky. The satellite is approximately 22,300 miles above the equator. And the reason why it is there is because as it's moving and the world's moving, it's actually making it almost like it's stationary, right? Like they're moving together. It moves with the earth. Okay. So that's important to know about satellite. When it comes to using any type of network, we have to have a quality of service checks and balances in place. So quality of service, QoS, so the uppercase Q for quality, lowercase o for the small word of, and then uppercase S for service, is a measurement of quality of data being delivered across any type of network. So there's a lot of companies that have QoS in place in their systems, but they check for different things. So we're going to talk more about an ESI net, which is kind of like a data superhighway. But an ESI net can be designated so that the QoS control is built into that system. So whatever mechanism, whatever means that data is going from one place to another, you can have a QoS control built right into that network, right into the network. So for instance, if there's too much data being delivered across a network, the data packets will slow down or even stop being delivered if it's not good quality. For a voice call being delivered in IP, this means that the call could be dropped, may be dropped, or the quality of the call would be too low to be useful. So having these checks and balances in place is really important. So look at that. That's where we are. So we are finished with today. Next week, I will have a guest speaker. My dear friend Michael DeRose from Rapid SOS will be your presenter. He takes the radio and emergency management section, and he usually fills in the place where I know I'm not going to be able to teach. Now, last week was unexpected. The following week, I have to reschedule because of surgery that my mom's having. That's pretty significant, and I have to be there. But Michael is going to fill in while I'm teaching in Memphis for next week, but this is his area of expertise. He's wonderful. I think you'll get a lot out of the presentation, but it will be radio stuff and emergency management. So look for Michael next week. I'm going to leave my contact information here, as I always do. My email address is there. Please like and follow my social media to keep up with the things that I'm doing. I have also started a TikTok that I have to add here. A lot of mental health and encouragement and positivity for first responders, which 911 folks and first responders. Up in the right-hand corner is my podcast, On Scene First with Tracy Eldridge, where we talk about 3 different topics. We talk about technology that can help save our callers. We talk about leadership to build better people-driven leaders. And we talk about mental health and wellness. So all 3 of those things are helping to save lives on both sides of the call. In the lower right-hand corner is my private Facebook group, the On Scene First Safety Net. It's a safe community for first responders to seek information on mental health and wellness. If you're struggling, there might be somebody in there that's struggling too. So until next time, my friends, stay safe, stay strong, and stay here. We need you.